Tonight, we delve into the darkest corners of human history, a place where the line between life and death blurs, and the unimaginable becomes terrifyingly real. For as long as humanity has gazed into the abyss of mortality, there has been a whispered terror. What if death isn't the end? What if, somehow, something comes back? Not as a spirit, not as a memory, but as the very body we laid to rest, now twisted, reanimated, or worse, possessed by something malevolent. This isn't just the stuff of modern horror films. It's a primal, universal dread woven into the very fabric of our earliest civilizations. From the hushed burial rites of ancient Egypt to the desolate battlefields of forgotten empires, the fear of the dead refusing to stay buried has haunted us, a chilling echo across millennia. This fear isn't just about a corpse moving. It's about the violation of natural order, the desecration of the sacred, and the horrifying possibility that what returns is no longer the loved one we knew, but a grotesque parody, a vessel for something unspeakable. Consider the chilling accounts found in ancient texts. The Egyptians, masters of mummification, believed deeply in the preservation of the body for the afterlife, yet their spells and rituals weren't just about guiding the soul. Many were protective incantations against malevolent spirits attempting to inhabit a preserved corpse, or even the deceased's own spirit returning with ill intent. Fast forward to the ancient Greeks and Romans, where tales of revenants, the restless dead, circulated widely. These were not mere ghosts, but physical manifestations, often described as pale, gaunt figures, sometimes even bloated and disfigured, emerging from their graves to torment the living. Philosophers and historians like Pliny the Younger documented such occurrences, not as folklore, but as genuine, albeit terrifying, events. Their narratives painted vivid pictures of villages plagued by these reanimated entities, forcing communities to resort to drastic measures to ensure the dead remained undisturbed. The very foundations of our understanding of death have always carried this unsettling caveat. What if we're wrong, and something or someone can come back? Across diverse cultures, the narrative of the reanimated dead takes on myriad forms, each more terrifying than the last. In Scandinavian folklore, we find the draugr, a corporeal undead creature that guards its burial mound, possessing superhuman strength, the ability to control weather, and a distinct stench of decay. They could grow to monstrous sizes, bringing madness to those who encountered them. Far across the globe, in Chinese legends, the jiangshi or hopping vampire emerged a reanimated corpse, often stiffened by rigor mortis, that moves by hopping and preys on the living, draining their life force. Its origins are often tied to improper burial or unnatural death. Then there are the ghouls of Middle Eastern lore, creatures said to haunt cemeteries and desolate places, preying on human flesh, particularly that of the freshly deceased. These aren't just spooky stories. They are cultural reflections of a profound, inherent fear that death is not always a peaceful transition, but sometimes a gateway for something horrific to return. But what drives these returns? Folklore offers many explanations, each more chilling than the last. Sometimes, it's an unfulfilled vow, a violent death, or a curse that binds the spirit to its physical vessel, compelling it to rise. Other times, it's external forces at play, dark magic, necromancy, or the insidious influence of malevolent spirits seeking a host. The concept of possession, where an external entity takes control of a body, living or dead, is perhaps even more terrifying than reanimation. A reanimated corpse is a husk. A possessed body is a puppet, its former inhabitant trapped or expelled, while something else peers through its eyes, speaks with its tongue, and moves with its limbs. This distinction introduces another layer of dread. Is the returning entity the person we knew, distorted, or is it an entirely different, malevolent consciousness wearing their skin? The idea that a loved one's body could be a mere costume for a demonic entity is a fear that strikes at the very core of our identity and our relationships with the departed. The medieval period in Europe, rife with plague and superstition, saw a surge in accounts of revenants and vampires. These were not the suave, romantic figures of modern fiction, but grotesque, bloated corpses, often described as feeding on the living, spreading disease, and causing widespread panic. Villages would dig up graves, finding bodies that, due to natural decomposition processes like gas buildup, appeared fresh or bloated, or even had blood around their mouths from internal bleeding. These natural phenomena, misunderstood in an era without modern forensics, were interpreted as irrefutable proof of the undead. Methods to kill these revenants were brutal. Staking through the heart, decapitation, burning the body, even burying them face down or placing rocks in their mouths to prevent feeding. These aren't just folktales. They are recorded historical responses to perceived threats, reflecting a genuine and pervasive belief that the dead could, and did, return, demanding horrific measures to put them back to rest. The sheer universality of these tales, from the deserts of ancient Egypt to the frozen tundras of Scandinavia, from the bustling markets of medieval Europe to the remote villages of rural Asia, underscores a fundamental human vulnerability. The fear isn't just of death itself, but of death corrupted, of the natural order inverted. It's the creeping dread that what we carefully bury might not stay buried, that the sanctity of the grave is merely a fragile illusion. This primal terror has never truly left us. It simply evolves with our understanding, or lack thereof, of the world. Even in our modern scientific age, the cold grip of these ancient fears can still seize us. The idea of reanimation and possession taps into our deepest anxieties. Loss of control, violation of the body, and the ultimate horror of seeing something utterly unnatural wear the face of someone we once loved. This isn't just about zombies or ghosts. It's about the unsettling truth that some things, once dead, refuse to stay that way, and what comes back is always wrong. Even in our supposedly enlightened age, the echoes of these ancient fears reverberate. While we may dismiss historical accounts as superstition, the modern mind still grapples with the concept of the dead returning. Think of the widespread appeal of zombie narratives, a contemporary manifestation of the reanimated corpse, driven by a mindless hunger. These stories, though fictional, tap into that same primal fear. The loss of humanity, the body as an empty vessel, and the relentless, unstoppable march of something that should be dead but isn't. But beyond the obvious, there's a more insidious, quiet dread. The idea of medical reanimation, while miraculous in its intent, subtly flirts with the very boundaries we discuss. And the idea of mental illness or unforeseen neurological conditions causing someone to appear possessed or changed can trigger those ancient, instinctual fears. We might use different language now, but the core terror remains. The profound disturbance when the dead, or even the living, come back, altered, when they return not as they were, but as something else entirely. Something wrong. The slow-burn dread of reanimation and possession isn't just about immediate horror. It's about the insidious corruption, the gradual realization that what you thought was safe is compromised. It's the chilling discovery that the person you mourn is now a hollow shell, animated by an unseen malevolence. This is a fear that gnaws at the edges of your sanity, forcing you to question everything you thought you knew about life, death, and the soul. It's the subtle shift in their eyes, the unnatural cadence in their voice, the unsettling familiarity of their gestures, all twisted by an alien presence. This isn't about jump scares. It's about the erosion of reality, the horrifying understanding that the world you inhabit might be far more permeable, far more dangerous than you ever dared to imagine. Tonight, we will journey through tales where the grave is not a final resting place, but merely a temporary holding cell, and what emerges from it is a terrifying testament to the darkness that lurks beyond the veil. The air thickens, doesn't it? A chill that has nothing to do with the temperature outside, but everything to do with the dread that seeps into your bones when you confront the impossible. We're not talking about your garden variety ghost stories tonight. Oh no. Tonight, we delve into the realm where the dead don't just linger. They return. They walk among us, or at least something that looks like them does. And the most terrifying part? They often return to the people who love them most, twisting that love into a slow, agonizing poison. Imagine the relief, the sheer, overwhelming joy, when someone you mourned, someone you buried, suddenly reappears on your doorstep. Your heart would leap, wouldn't it? Your mind would scream, miracle! But then, just a flicker, a subtle wrongness, begins to gnaw at the edges of that joy. A whisper that says, "This isn't quite right." That's where our first tale begins. A story of a daughter, a family, and a homecoming that was anything but a blessing. The Owens family had known tragedy. Their daughter, Eleanor, a vibrant, artistic 19-year-old, had been gone for a year. A hiking accident in the remote wilderness, a fall from a treacherous cliff face. Her body had been recovered, identified, and laid to rest. The grief had been a raw, open wound, slowly, painfully scarring over. Her mother, Sarah, still left a light on in Eleanor's room every night, a futile beacon against the darkness of her absence. Her father, David, had retreated into his work, a silent fortress of sorrow. Then, one Tuesday evening, just as the first autumn rains began to lash against the windows, there was a knock. Not the polite rap of a neighbor, but a tentative, almost hesitant tap. David, surprised, peered through the peephole. His heart stopped. Standing on their porch, drenched and shivering, was Eleanor. His Eleanor, alive. The reunion was a maelstrom of emotions. Tears, embraces, a flood of bewildered questions. Eleanor, pale and thin, offered only vague explanations of amnesia, of wandering lost in the wilderness, of finally finding her way back. They wanted to believe her, desperately. How could they not? This was their daughter, their lost child, returned from the grave. But as the initial shock subsided, tiny fissures began to appear in their relief. Small things at first. Eleanor had always been a voracious reader, her nose constantly buried in a book. Now, she barely glanced at her beloved first editions. Her once messy, vibrant art studio remained untouched. She showed no inclination to pick up a brush. Her favorite band, whose posters still adorned her walls, played on the radio, and she seemed not to notice or care. Sarah noticed the new habits first. Eleanor had always been a light sleeper, prone to nightmares. Now she slept deeply, almost unnervingly so. Yet Sarah would sometimes find her daughter standing in the living room in the dead of night, staring out the window perfectly still. When questioned, Eleanor would simply say she couldn't sleep, offering a tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her appetite had changed too. She picked at her favorite meals, but consumed prodigious amounts of raw meat, a strange, almost animalistic hunger that made Sarah's stomach churn. David, ever the rationalist, dismissed it as trauma, a coping mechanism for her ordeal. But Sarah felt a cold knot tightening in her stomach. This wasn't just trauma. This was different. This was wrong. One evening, Sarah tried to comfort Eleanor, stroking her hair as she used to when Eleanor was a child. Eleanor flinched, a sharp, almost violent reaction. "Don't," she whispered, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "I don't like to be touched." Sarah pulled her hand back as if burned. Eleanor had always been affectionate, a hugger. This wasn't her daughter, or at least not the daughter she remembered. The physical resemblance was undeniable, but the essence, the spark, the soul of Eleanor, seemed to have been replaced by something else, something cold and distant. They began to notice a peculiar scent clinging to her, faint but persistent, like damp earth and something metallic. A smell that Sarah, with a growing sense of dread, recognized from the day they had visited Eleanor's grave. Eleanor's memory of her ordeal remained frustratingly vague. She couldn't recall specific details of her time lost. No vivid images, no terrifying close calls with nature. When Sarah pressed her about shared childhood memories, inside jokes, or their special mother-daughter rituals, Eleanor's eyes would glaze over. She would offer generic responses, or simply change the subject. It was as if she was trying to access a database that had been wiped clean, leaving only superficial files. The family dog, Buster, a scruffy terrier mix who had adored Eleanor, now growled low in his throat whenever she approached, his hackles raised, a primal fear in his eyes that no amount of coaxing could dispel. Animals, Sarah knew, often sensed things humans couldn't. And Buster was terrified of the person who now wore Eleanor's face. The creeping unease solidified into a chilling certainty for Sarah one rainy afternoon. She was looking through an old photo album, a cherished relic of happier times. She stopped at a picture of Eleanor, taken just weeks before her disappearance. Eleanor, radiant and laughing, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Sarah showed it to the Eleanor who now sat across from her. "Remember this day, sweetie?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We were at Grandma's cottage, picking flowers for her birthday." Eleanor looked at the photograph, her gaze unsettlingly blank. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "Yes, I remember." But there was no warmth, no recognition, no spark of shared history in her eyes. Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't her daughter remembering. This was her daughter pretending to remember. She was an imposter, a meticulous mimicry, but imperfect. The subtle wrongness had escalated, becoming undeniable. Sarah started to notice tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in Eleanor's face. A flicker in her eyes when she was deep in thought, a momentary stiffness in her smile. The scent of damp earth grew stronger, almost overpowering in Eleanor's room. One night, Sarah crept into Eleanor's room while she was sleeping. The room was cold, unnaturally so. Eleanor lay perfectly still, her chest not rising and falling. Sarah reached out a hesitant hand, placing it gently over Eleanor's heart. Nothing. No heartbeat. Not a single thump. Panic seized her, a raw, primal scream trapped in her throat. This wasn't her daughter. This was a shell, an empty vessel, animated by something else entirely. Something that had crawled out of the earth, wearing Eleanor's skin. The realization was a punch to the gut, a suffocating terror. Their beloved Eleanor was still gone. What stood before them, eating their food, sleeping in their daughter's bed, was an imitation, a horror cloaked in familiarity. And now, the true nature of this return was beginning to reveal itself. The distant gaze, the lack of emotion, the unnerving stillness. It wasn't just trauma. It was the absence of life. It was the presence of something else, something cold and ancient, masquerading as their child. What did it want? Why had it come back? And how long had it been subtly, insidiously twisting their reality? The slow burn dread had ignited, consuming their lives in a silent, psychological torment. They had welcomed a monster into their home, believing it was their daughter. And the monster was now fully awake. The wind howled its mournful song across the jagged coastline, carrying with it the salt tang of the sea and something else, something cold and unsettling. Tales had always been spun in this remote fishing village, whispered over flickering hearths and clinking glasses of cheap ale. Tales of the sea's insatiable hunger, of ships lost to storms, and of those who vanished without a trace. But never, not in the oldest of memories, had there been a tale quite like this. It began with whispers, hushed and hesitant, carried on the very wind itself. Whispers of a figure seen on the distant beach, silhouetted against the dying light, where no one should have been. A figure that moved with a strange, unhurried grace, emerging from the churning gray of the surf as if born anew from the ocean's depths. It was the silhouette of Elias Thorne, a fisherman lost to a sudden squall 6 months prior. His boat found splintered, his body never recovered. The initial reaction was a surge of tearful relief, a miracle whispered from one trembling lip to the next. His wife, Eleanor, nearly collapsed in the arms of her neighbors, her grief-stricken heart suddenly flooded with a hope she hadn't dared to dream. But as Elias drew closer, a strange disquiet began to settle over the small crowd gathered on the muddy path. His clothes, though tattered, were not waterlogged as they should have been after months at sea. His skin, usually ruddy from sun and wind, was pale, almost translucent with an unnatural smoothness. And his eyes held a depth, a stillness that was utterly alien. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much, or perhaps seen nothing at all. He offered no explanation, no joyous reunion, just a slow, deliberate walk towards his waiting wife. A ghost returned to the living. The initial elation quickly soured into a pervasive dread. Elias was different, profoundly so. He spoke little, and when he did, his voice was flat, devoid of the familiar warmth and gruff humor his wife remembered. His movements were too precise, too economical, lacking the natural clumsiness of a man who worked with nets and heavy tackle. He never seemed to tire, working his small plot of land from before dawn until long after dusk, with a tireless efficiency that bordered on the mechanical. Children, usually drawn to the quiet kindness of Old Man Thorne, now shied away from him, their instincts keener than their parents'. Dogs, usually eager for a pat, would snarl and bark at his approach, their hackles raised, their tails tucked. It was as if every living thing, save for the unsuspecting Eleanor, recognized an intruder in Elias's skin. Then came the inexplicable occurrences. One evening, a sudden freak storm descended upon the village, whipping the sea into a frenzy. Several fishing boats, caught unawares, were in grave danger. As the villagers huddled in terror, praying for their loved ones, Elias stood on the shore, seemingly unfazed by the lashing rain and wind. He raised a hand, a slow, deliberate gesture, and the storm, which had been moments from tearing the boats apart, began to abate. The winds softened, the waves lessened, and within minutes, the sea was merely choppy. It was too sudden, too perfect. Another time, a child fell gravely ill, feverish and unresponsive. The village elder, usually the first to offer herbal remedies, shook her head grimly. Elias, hearing the news, simply walked to the child's bedside, placed a hand on their forehead, and the fever broke instantly, leaving the child calm and alert. These weren't miracles. They were violations. The fear blossomed into full-blown paranoia. Whispers turned to hushed conversations in darkened corners of the tavern, eyes darting nervously towards the windows. "He's not Elias," Old Man Hemlock rasped, his voice trembling. "That's not the man we knew. That's something else wearing his skin." The strange abilities, once perhaps viewed with awe, now fueled their terror. He didn't just survive the sea, he commanded it. He didn't just heal. He intervened in a way that felt unnatural, an affront to the natural order of life and death. How could he have these powers? Where did they come from? The most chilling explanation began to take root in their minds, nurtured by the uncanny stillness of Elias's gaze and the subtle, unsettling wrongness that permeated his very presence. Possession. Something had come back, but it wasn't Elias. It was something else, something that had worn his face, worn his memories, and was now here, amongst them. But what did it want? At first, its presence seemed benign, almost helpful if unsettling. But as the weeks stretched into months, a more sinister pattern began to emerge. Disagreements within the village, once minor squabbles, now escalated into bitter feuds, fueled by suspicion and fear. Secrets, once closely guarded, seemed to leak out, appearing in conversations where they had no business being. It was as if Elias, or whatever inhabited him, was subtly, expertly manipulating them, sowing discord, chipping away at the communal trust that bound the village together. He rarely spoke, yet his presence was a constant, heavy weight, an unseen hand guiding their anxieties. There was a look in his eyes now, not just alien but calculating. A faint, almost imperceptible smile would sometimes touch his lips when a heated argument broke out, a fleeting flicker of satisfaction that sent shivers down the spines of those who witnessed it. He wasn't just observing, he was orchestrating. The village, once a tightly knit community, began to unravel. Neighbors who had shared meals and helped each other with harvests now eyed each other with suspicion. Trust became a scarce commodity, fear the prevailing currency. No one spoke openly of their fears regarding Elias, not wanting to be singled out, not wanting to be the next target of whatever unseen influence he wielded. But the silence itself was a testament to their terror. Eleanor, oblivious or perhaps willfully blind, defended her returned husband fiercely, her steadfast love making her an unwitting accomplice to the entity's plans. And so, the possession tightened its grip, not just on Elias's body, but on the very soul of the village. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving them trapped in a slow-burn dread, waiting for the true intentions of this resurrected stranger to finally reveal themselves. The dead had indeed come back, but wrong. Terribly, terrifyingly wrong. And they were all living witnesses to a horror far more insidious than any storm or lost ship. The air thickens, doesn't it? As if the veil separating our world from something else grows thinner with each shared whisper. We've spoken of things returning, changed, subtly wrong. But what happens when the change isn't subtle at all? What happens when the wrongness is a direct result of human hands, fumbling with forces they can barely comprehend, driven by a grief so profound it eclipses all reason? Our next tale plunges us directly into that abyss, where love, twisted by loss, becomes the most potent catalyst for terror. It's a story of a desperate gamble, a forbidden ritual, and the unspeakable price paid when one tries to cheat the ultimate finality. Forget the slow drift of the possessed or the subtle shift of the reanimated. This is a direct confrontation with the consequences of tearing open the very fabric of existence. Elias Thorne was a man consumed. His beloved wife, Sarah, taken by a sudden, vicious illness, had left a void in his life so vast it threatened to swallow him whole. He was a scholar, a man of intellect and reason, but grief had shattered his rationality, leaving him vulnerable to whispers from the darker corners of his library. He'd stumbled upon obscure texts, ancient grimoires speaking of thresholds, of transitions, of pathways that might, just might, be reversed. The academic curiosity that once guided his studies transformed into an obsessive quest. He dismissed the warnings, the chilling implications, the moral boundaries. All he saw was a faint, tantalizing glimmer of hope, a way to bring Sarah back. He convinced himself it was love driving him, not madness. But the line between the two, when steeped in such sorrow, is often indistinguishable. His research led him down an increasingly perilous path. The text spoke of anchors, objects deeply connected to the deceased, and conduits, living energy to fuel the reanimation. He spent months gathering the components, each one feeling heavier, colder, more ominous than the last. Sarah's wedding ring, a lock of her hair, earth from her grave, and more disturbing items that twisted his stomach even as he acquired them. The texts were clear. This wasn't a mere calling back of a spirit. It was an attempt to rebind a soul to its mortal coil, to force the natural order into submission. The rituals themselves were elaborate, demanding precision, timing, and a certain openness to what lay beyond the conventional. Elias, despite his growing unease, pressed on. His resolve hardened by the image of Sarah's face, now a fading memory, driving him forward. The final preparations were made in the hidden chamber beneath his old Victorian house, a space he'd soundproofed and darkened. It reeked of stale air and something metallic. Runes were painted on the floor in a mixture of ochre and his own blood, the air thick with the scent of burning herbs and the heavy sweetness of decay. He positioned Sarah's preserved body on a makeshift altar, a ghastly parody of repose. Her features, though preserved, were distant, a shell. He reminded himself that her true essence, her soul, was what he sought to reclaim. As the appointed hour drew near, the air in the chamber grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards, a subtle pressure building in his ears. There was no turning back now. The desperate gamble was about to begin. At the stroke of midnight, Elias began the incantation. His voice, at first trembling, grew steady, resonating with the ancient words he barely understood but uttered with unwavering conviction. The candlelight flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the rough stone walls. A cold gust of wind, seemingly from nowhere, swept through the sealed chamber, extinguishing several candles. He ignored it, his eyes fixed on Sarah's inert form, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The air grew colder, biting, and then a sound. Not a voice, not a gasp, but a low, guttural moan that seemed to emanate from the very stone. It was a sound of immense pain, and it wasn't Sarah's. It was a sound of something being torn, pulled, stretched beyond endurance. Elias faltered, his chant breaking, a cold dread washing over him. Then her eyes opened, not the gentle, familiar gaze of his beloved Sarah, but wide, vacant orbs, black as the deepest abyss, reflecting nothing but the frantic candlelight. A tremor ran through her body, a jerky, unnatural movement. Her mouth opened, and a rasping sound escaped, a choked, wet groan that was utterly devoid of human warmth. Elias stumbled back, knocking over a censer, its smoke swirling around him like a suffocating shroud. This wasn't Sarah. This was something else, something that had been dragged back, incomplete, broken, perhaps even possessed. The ritual had worked in a horrifying, twisted way. He had brought something back, but it wasn't the woman he loved. It was a vessel, a shell, inhabited by an agony so profound it radiated outward, filling the chamber with an oppressive, tangible despair. The entity, for it was no longer Sarah, began to move. Slowly, stiffly, it sat up, its head lolling to one side. Its movements were jerky, as if its muscles were battling against an unseen force, or perhaps, as if they were not entirely its own. Its gaze, though unseeing, seemed to pierce through Elias, not with recognition, but with a deep, burning resentment. A low, continuous moan emanated from its throat, a chorus of pain and confusion. It was trapped, caught between the living and the dead, a tormented echo of what once was, now a grotesque parody. Elias had torn it from its rightful place, dragging it back into a body that was no longer fit to house a soul, and the agony of that forced re-entry was palpable. He had brought back not his wife, but a living scream. The entity remained in the chamber, a constant, unsettling presence. It didn't speak, not with words, but its ceaseless, low moans and its vacant, accusatory stare communicated volumes. Elias quickly learned it sought one thing: release. It wandered the house at night, not with malicious intent, but with a horrifying, single-minded purpose. It would move to windows, to doors, its movements growing slightly less stiff with each passing day, its awareness seeming to sharpen. It wasn't trying to escape. It was trying to find a way to sever the unnatural tether that bound it to its tormented existence. It was seeking the peace Elias had so cruelly denied it, and it conveyed this not through pleas, but through the sheer weight of its suffering, pressing down on him, a constant, chilling reminder of his monstrous act. But as weeks bled into months, Elias noticed a subtle shift. The tormented cries began to mingle with something else, something colder, something that tasted of bitterness and anger. The vacant gaze occasionally sharpened, focusing on him, and in those moments, he saw not just pain, but a nascent, chilling intelligence. It wasn't just seeking release anymore. It was seeking vengeance for its shattered peace, for the eternity of torment it had been condemned to endure. It wanted him to feel its pain, to understand the true horror of what he had done. The low moans were replaced by an eerie, drawn-out whisper that sometimes, just sometimes, sounded like his name. Elias, once the desperate husband, was now the hunted, trapped in his own home with the living consequence of his ultimate transgression. A wife who had come back, not to love, but to make him pay. The tales we've explored, from the chilling reanimation of Aunt Bethany to the unsettling rebirth in the quiet town of Blackwood, might seem like isolated incidents, separate whispers in the dark, unconnected echoes of the supernatural. But listen closely, my friends. Feel the subtle currents that run beneath the surface of each narrative. A shared chill, a common thread of dread that weaves through every account of the dead refusing to stay buried. It's not just about the act of returning, is it? It's about the manner of their return, the fundamental, unholy shift that renders them something less, or perhaps something horrifyingly more, than the people they once were. They came back, yes, but they came back wrong. The eyes that held love now hold an alien hunger. The hands that offered comfort now offer only a cold, possessive grip. This isn't life renewed. It's life perverted. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The insidious nature of these entities lies in their mimicry. They wear the faces of our loved ones. They use their voices. They retain fragments of their personalities. But it's a performance, a grotesque charade designed to lull us into a false sense of security, to open the door to our most sacred spaces. Aunt Bethany's insistence on familiar routines, the boy in Blackwood's innocent questions, the wife's lingering affection, these aren't genuine expressions. They are tools, lures. The memories, the mannerisms, the intimate knowledge they possess, those aren't their own. They are the stolen remnants of the souls they displaced or devoured. Imagine the horror. The person you loved, reduced to a hollow vessel, a puppet animated by something ancient and malevolent. This isn't just grief. It's a betrayal of the soul itself, a violation of the natural order that leaves behind a shell of what once was, animated by an unseen, malevolent force. What force is powerful enough to achieve such a grotesque miracle? Is it some dark magic? Forbidden rituals whispered from forgotten grimoires? Is it a parasitic entity from another dimension, drawn to the thin veil between life and death? Or perhaps, as some ancient texts suggest, is it the very fabric of reality fraying, allowing things that should not be to slip through? These beings, whatever their origin, don't merely reanimate a corpse. They repurpose it. They inhabit it. They transform it into an instrument for their own inscrutable desires. And their desires rarely align with human understanding or compassion. The chilling implication is that the act of reanimation is not a gift, but a curse. Not a return, but an invasion. A terrifying transaction where a life is exchanged for an unlife. And the true cost is borne by those left behind, who must confront the monstrous parody of their loved ones. Now, you might be thinking these are just stories, ancient myths, or isolated incidents confined to the shadowed corners of history. But consider this. How many times have you heard of someone changing after a traumatic event? A near-death experience, a sudden illness, a profound loss? They come back different. A vacant stare, a chilling new habit, a shift in personality that can't quite be explained. We often attribute it to trauma, to the psychological scars of an ordeal. But what if, just what if, some of these instances are something more? What if the veil is thinner than we dare to imagine, and some of those who come back aren't entirely themselves anymore? What if the empty spaces in our hospitals, the quiet streets of our neighborhoods, hide a secret that would shatter our understanding of life and death? The thought is unsettling, isn't it? The idea that these entities aren't confined to dusty old books, but walk among us, indistinguishable until it's too late. They blend in, they observe, they learn, they have infinite patience. Unlike the shambling ghouls of classic horror, these entities are subtle, insidious. They don't announce their presence with a scream or a grotesque display. Instead, they integrate, they mimic, they wait. They are the quiet neighbor whose eyes seem a little too knowing, the distant relative who asks strangely personal questions, the colleague whose laughter never quite reaches their eyes. The terror isn't in their monstrous appearance, but in their chilling normalcy. They are the wolves in sheep's clothing, and the flock is oblivious. The true horror isn't just that they exist, but that they could be anyone, anywhere. The person sitting across from you right now, the voice on the other end of the phone. How can you be sure? The unsettling truth is you can't. And that uncertainty, that lingering doubt, is their most potent weapon. This isn't about jump scares or blood-soaked monsters. This is about a deeper, more pervasive dread. The kind that sinks into your bones and makes you question everything you thought you knew about life, death, and the soul. The stories we've shared today aren't just meant to entertain. They're meant to plant a seed of doubt, to make you look a little closer at the people around you, to listen a little more intently to the subtle shifts in tone, to notice the unnatural glint in someone's eyes. Because if these entities are truly among us, if they are capable of such perfect mimicry, then how do we ever truly know who we're talking to? How do we distinguish between the grieving and the imposter, the living and the returned? The very fabric of human connection becomes suspect, tainted by the possibility of the monstrous hidden within the familiar. So, as these tales conclude, and the echoes of their horror fade into the quiet of your surroundings, I leave you with a lingering chill, a thought to ponder in the dead of night. The figures in our stories, the returned, they represent a profound violation, a defiance of the natural order that has consequences far beyond what any mortal mind can comprehend. They are not merely ghosts or zombies. They are something far more terrifying. They are the ultimate cosmic joke, a perversion of life itself, wearing the skin of our loved ones. And the question remains, hanging heavy in the air, a whisper against the silence. What is the true cost of cheating death? What dark price is paid not just by the one who returns, but by everyone they touch? And are we, in our desperate desire to hold onto those we love, inadvertently opening the door to something far more sinister than eternal slumber? The answers, my friends, are not easily found. Perhaps they are not meant to be found. For some mysteries are best left undisturbed, their secrets buried deep beneath the earth. But the questions themselves, they linger. They gnaw at the edges of our comfort. They remind us that the world is a far stranger, far more terrifying place than we often allow ourselves to believe. And the next time you look into the eyes of someone you love, someone who has perhaps endured a profound loss or a brush with death, take a moment, just a moment, and wonder, are you truly seeing the person you know? Or is there something else looking back? Something ancient, something cold, something that just came back wrong? The darkness always finds a way, and sometimes it wears a familiar face. Sleep tight if you can.